Alrighty guys, so today we are looking at a couple of new lenses. These are freaking insane. I'm so excited to show you these. These are the new SIRUI Nightwalker Super 35mm cinema lenses. And what is crazy about these is they are a T1.2 aperture, which is just freaking insane. So what I have here is the 24mm and the 55mm T1.2, and these things are absolute insane low light beasts. Now over the past 6 to 12 months, I don't know exactly what's happened with like the lens industry, but lenses are just getting smaller and smaller and faster and faster. And if you don't understand what I mean by fast, I'm referring to the aperture. So you know, like 12 months ago, you know, T1.8, 1.4 was like, kind of like very, very fast, but now like this, a T1.2 lens, and look how small this is. Like it's freaking tiny. So I don't know what sorcery is going on with these lens manufacturers and whatnot, but I love where it's going. So now firstly, if you don't understand what a T-stop is, basically a T-stop is an actual scientifically proven amount of light that goes through the lens, whereas an f-stop is a theoretical number, so it's a calculated number. And the reason that you'll see T-stops on cinema lenses and say f-stops on photo lenses is that when you're using cinema lenses, if you swap between say a 24mm and a 55mm and you're shooting at T1.2, you don't want the light coming through to change, right? You want it to be exactly the same. So by having T-stops, it means that it's actually a scientifically proven amount of light coming through the back. So if you swap from lens to lens to lens, you don't have to adjust anything on the camera. The light input is going to be the exact same. And the reason this was developed is that back in the film days, obviously you want your shots to be exposed the same, right? You don't have to keep adjusting things from lens to lens to lens to make sure that everything looks the same. So it's more so just like a bonus now with digital because you can make minor adjustments, but it just means that you don't have to think about it when you're swapping from lens to lens. And now the fact that this is T1.2 means that this is an absolute low light beast, but it also means you're gonna get a ton of bokeh as well. And that is the positive and the negative of having such a low aperture. So obviously you can let way more light in, so you don't need as much light to be able to shoot, but it also means that the focus plane is gonna be insanely thin, which you'll see when using this at T1.2. And the images these produce are just like insane, but also keep in mind that you're probably not gonna be shooting at T1.2 all the time. Like there's times when you don't want to be shooting with that much depth of field, like if you're actually wanting to have a lot of stuff in focus, you don't want to have an aperture that is that low. Now one downside that I have noticed with the SIRUI lenses is that they only go up to a maximum aperture of T16. Now this isn't that big of a deal. Like I think we're just used to lenses going up to, you know, like f22 or f32 or something like really, really high, but typically like I don't really use lenses above T8. So it doesn't really bother me that it only goes up to T16. Now if we jump into an actual lens chart and look at some comparisons between the different apertures, you do notice that with the 24mm, there is quite a bit of distortion and the edge sharpness isn't as good, even like basically the whole way through. So you're gonna get really good sharpness in the center of the frame, and towards the edge, I think it's because of that bowing and that actual distortion, you're not gonna get as good edge sharpness, but this is a really cool characteristic thing. Like if you want things to be completely sharp from edge to edge, probably just don't shoot on the 24mm. Whereas with the 55mm, this thing is like tack sharp from edge to edge at all apertures. Like at 1.2, there's a little bit of ghosting, but the sharpness is still really, really good. And by about T1.6, 1.8, basically the ghosting disappears and you just have pure sharpness, which is insane. Now one thing I have noticed, and this has been a problem with SIRUI lenses in the past, is that the 24mm to the 50mm, the color temperature doesn't quite match. So the 24mm seems to be a little bit warmer, whereas the 55mm seems to be a little bit cooler. So you just have to keep that in mind if you are going to be using these, just to make sure that you kind of adjust your white balance in camera or adjust it in post to make sure that you match them up properly. And because these are cinema lenses, you're going to notice that we have gears built in. And the reason we have this is typically we'll add on like an external focus motor or an actual focus adjuster, and then we can manually adjust the focus on something outside of the lens. And the cool thing now is that these lenses actually have a 270-degree focus throw. So a lot of the other SIRUI lenses that I've been using, I think because they've adapted photo lenses to cinema lenses, they've only had a 90-degree throw, which is cool if you're pulling off the barrel. But if you're using, you know, like a Tilta Nano or a Tilta Nucleus MSI and you're wanting to pull focus with an actual device or even with like a focus wheel, it's better to have a 270-degree focus throw because then you can make really minor adjustments when you need to. And you also notice that the focus rings and the iris rings are in the exact same spot, which is perfect because it means that when you're actually changing lenses, you don't have to adjust anything on your camera. You can literally just swap the lenses, the focus motor will line up, the iris motor will line up if you use that, and you can just keep shooting straight away. Now, one downside of having a 270-degree focus throw is that if you are gonna pull focus on the lens itself, it makes it quite difficult because you have to really throw it to go from one end to the other, especially if we're shooting at like T1.2, T1.4, you're gonna be throwing the focus quite a bit. Now, as for minimum focus, on the 24mm, it is 0.3 meters, and on the 55mm, it is 0.6 meters. So 55mm, not as good, like you're not gonna be able to get as close-ups and whatnot, but 30 centimeters on the 24mm was actually pretty decent. Now, while we're on focus, another thing to mention is the focus breathing. So it is very, very minimal with these, which is really, really good. There is still a little bit, which you typically get on a lot of lenses, but the fact that these are so small and so compact, I'm really surprised with how they were able to actually reduce the focus breathing that much in such a small compact design. Now, the lens itself is made of a high-end aluminium, and it does come in a black and a gray. I went with the black just because it's a bit more of a stealthy look, and it works really good with my black cameras. But the reason it's good having an aluminium design is that these are really, really lightweight. And everything from the lens to the lens gears to the actual mount itself is all actual solid metal, which means that it's gonna last for a long time. Now, the only downside of having really, really small cinema lenses is that, number one, they don't look as good, so they're not as impressive to your clients. But another reason is that typically a lot of the lens filters and whatnot, I get around an 82mm thread, because I try to get it as big so it fits as much stuff as possible. It just means you have to like adapt it to fit on this being a 67mm. However, it's nowhere as bad as the 35mm carbon anamorphic lens they made. This thing has a thread filter of 58mm, which is just way too small. And like to adapt from 82 down to this, you have so many filters on there and it just looks weird and it just doesn't work as good. Right, so now I've been shooting with these for the last 2 weeks, and to be honest, when I first got these, I was very skeptical of the T1.2 aperture because I have used kind of like budget cinema lenses in the past that have a low aperture, and essentially what they do is they make it really low, but the image quality is just so bad at that low aperture that you basically can't use them. Like for example, the Samyang lenses, they're little cheapo ones, they say they're a T1.2 or 1.4 or something, but basically you can't use the lens below like T2.8 because the image is so soft, there's so much chromatic aberration, and it just basically looks terrible. Whereas these, I would actually happily use at T1.2, T1.4 because the image quality actually holds up and there's not a lot of chromatic aberration, there is still a lot of sharpness there, and you can actually get a decent image out of it wide open. And whenever I'm looking for cinema lenses, I'll always look for cinema lenses that allow you to actually shoot wide open, because like, what's the point of having a T1.2 cinema lens if you are never going to use it to T1.2 because the image quality is just absolutely trash. So I'm definitely a big fan of these. I'll probably continue to actually build out this set so I have the full set, because having a T1.2 aperture across the board just means that if you are shooting in low light situations or you are wanting to increase the amount of depth of field seen in a shot, you can do that with something like this. Now the ones I have here are an RF native lens, and they do come in a bunch of different lens mounts that I'll list here. But the big thing to remember, guys, is that these are super 35mm cinema lenses. So you cannot use these on a full frame camera, because if you do, you're going to get an image that looks like this. You're going to get all this vignetting around the edges, and it's just not going to cover the full sensor because it's just not designed for a full frame sensor. Now, where these are going to be perfect in our kit is, number one, we're shooting in low light, but number two, if we're going to shoot on a gimbal, because they're nice and light, they're nice and compact, and we don't have to add too much weight to the gimbal or to the operator to be able to get some really nice shots. And being a T1.2 aperture, this would actually pair really good with the DJI Lidar System, so you can essentially turn this into an autofocus lens. Not sure how good it would work. Something for maybe Jason to test. Jason, if you can test these out, this would be awesome. We essentially use these on a gimbal because they're nice and compact. So I guess if you're wanting to get more control in your shots and you want to move to a manual focus system, and you also shoot in a lot of low light situations, and maybe you want to keep your rig nice and small, these are literally the perfect lens for you. It solves all those issues. Also, if you operate on gimbals a lot as well with manual focus, these would be the perfect addition to your kit. And also, if you're just wanting to get started, these are great as well. Like, just don't look at the really, really cheap ones. Like, they're cheap for a reason, right? They might say that they're a T1.2 or a T1.4, and yeah, it's cool theoretically, but when you get them and you can't shoot wide open, it's just a waste of money. Like, you end up buying this low light lens and you can't even use it in low light. Whereas this thing is a low light lens and you can actually shoot wide open because it's actually sharp. Now, as for price, guys, this is freaking insane. So they've got an early bird 10% off, and these are $309 US per lens, which is, that is insane. Like, for what you're getting, I cannot believe that. But getting quick, because the super early bird price is limited to the first few people, and then it will go up to the full price. But anyway, guys, if you did enjoy this one, consider liking and subscribing to the channel if you want to find out any more about the SIRUI Nightwalker Super 35mm lenses. I'll leave the link down below to their page so you can check it all out and find out where to buy them. But anyway, guys, stay creative, keep crushing it, and I'll see you on the next one. Have fun.